The chandeliers sparkled above the grand ballroom, casting a golden glow over New York's richest. Champagne glasses clinked, violins played softly, and whispers floated through the air like smoke. But in the very center of the room, a scandal was about to erupt. Jonathan Colton, a self-made millionaire, with a smile as polished as his diamond cufflinks, pulled Cassandra Monroe close. She wasn't his wife. She was his wife's best friend. And in front of hundreds of powerful guests, Jonathan kissed her like he owned the world. Gasps cut through the music, cameras flashed. The city's elite leaned in, whispering furiously. How could he be so bold, so shameless? He didn't care. He smirked, savoring the attention, convinced he had won the game. But Jonathan had no idea what was coming, because just 15 minutes later, the doors to the ballroom would swing wide open. His wife, Scarlett Hayes, 6 months pregnant and glowing with quiet strength, would walk in. And she wouldn't be alone. At her side would be Adrian Blackwell, a reclusive billionaire CEO, the kind of man whose presence could silence a room. The scandal Jonathan thought he controlled was about to spiral beyond anything he imagined. Guests would not remember his kiss. They would remember the woman he betrayed, and the powerful man who chose to stand with her. And when Scarlett appeared, the entire room would fall silent, waiting for the storm to break. Scarlett Hayes had never dreamed of a life wrapped in diamonds and silk. She grew up in a small coastal town where her mother worked as a schoolteacher and her father fixed cars at a neighborhood garage. She was the kind of girl who spent afternoons painting by the sea, who believed love mattered more than money, and who thought loyalty was the greatest treasure of all. When Jonathan Colton swept her off her feet, she thought she had found her fairy tale. He was charming, ambitious, the kind of man who made promises with fire in his eyes. He told her she was his muse, his inspiration, the woman who made him believe in destiny. Scarlett believed him. She traded her quiet life for the city's glittering skyline, determined to build a home filled with warmth and laughter. For years, she poured her heart into their marriage. She supported Jonathan's rise from a junior executive to a millionaire business owner. She designed their home with her own hands, turning empty spaces into havens of beauty. When Jonathan stayed out late at corporate events, she stayed awake, waiting with dinner warm in the oven. When he stumbled home exhausted, she massaged his shoulders, whispering that she believed in him. And when she discovered she was pregnant, her world seemed perfect. Scarlett imagined the nursery, the tiny clothes, the lullabies. She dreamed of holding their baby together, of Jonathan's laughter filling the room as he rocked their child to sleep. For the first time she felt truly complete. But behind Jonathan's perfect smile, shadows grew. He became restless, distracted. Business trips stretched longer, phone calls ended abruptly, and Scarlett's instincts whispered that something was wrong. She pushed the doubts aside, because Cassandra Monroe, her best friend since college, told her not to worry. Cassandra, the woman Scarlett trusted like a sister, swore Jonathan was just under pressure. Scarlett clung to those words until the night of the gala. While Scarlett rested at home, cradling her unborn child, Jonathan paraded Cassandra across a ballroom filled with cameras and power players. The betrayal wasn't just about infidelity, it was about humiliation, a cruel dagger twisted in public view. Scarlett had given everything, her youth, her loyalty, her trust, and in return, she was replaced by the very person she had once called family. But Scarlett was not a woman built to break. Behind her soft voice and gentle smile lay quiet resilience, the kind that storms cannot destroy. She may have walked into that gala with trembling hands, but she carried more than sorrow. She carried strength, dignity, and a baby whose future she swore to protect. Jonathan thought she would remain silent, hidden at home, too fragile to fight. He thought he could flaunt his betrayal without consequence. He was wrong, because Scarlett Hayes was about to step into the spotlight, not as a victim, but as a woman ready to reclaim her honor. And she would not walk in alone. When Scarlett appeared, the city would no longer see a fragile wife. They would see a mother, a fighter, and the spark of a reckoning that Jonathan could never stop. The Crystal Renaissance Hotel was a monument to excess. Its grand ballroom stretched like a cathedral of wealth, marble floors polished to a mirror's shine, crystal chandeliers dripping from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Every detail screamed opulence, Orchids flown in from Singapore, gold-trimmed menus listing 5-course meals, and violins performing Mozart as if the music itself had been handpicked to flatter the rich. This was no ordinary night. It was the Bright Futures Gala, an annual event that brought together the city's wealthiest donors, politicians, and power brokers. Every seat at every table cost more than the average family's monthly rent, and every guest was dressed like they had stepped out of a magazine cover. Men in tailored tuxedos shook hands over investment deals, while women in glittering gowns whispered about mergers and marriages. At the center of it all stood Jonathan Colton. For him, tonight was not about charity. It was about dominance. He thrived under the chandeliers, every spotlight reflecting his smug grin. His tuxedo was custom, his watch worth more than a house, and on his arm was Cassandra Monroe, the woman he dared to parade as if she were a trophy. Their entrance had been calculated. Cassandra wore a crimson gown that clung to her every curve, the kind of dress designed to make whispers rise like smoke. Jonathan held her hand possessively, introducing her to investors, board members, and journalists with the confidence of a man untouchable. Guests gasped behind champagne flutes. A married man flaunting his mistress was scandal enough. Flaunting his wife's best friend? That was poison served on silver. Still, Jonathan relished the attention. To him, scandal was a currency. Every camera flash, every raised eyebrow only fed his ego. He smirked when he heard the whispers. Isn't that Scarlett's friend? He wanted Scarlett to be invisible, to disappear, to accept her place as forgotten. The orchestra swelled, the room buzzing with energy, but beneath the glamour ran an undercurrent of unease. People exchanged glances, some appalled, others entertained, all of them waiting for the inevitable fallout. Even the waiters serving champagne sensed it. Something about the air felt charged, heavy, as if the chandeliers themselves knew they were about to witness history. Jonathan took the stage, tapping the microphone with an arrogant smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "tonight we celebrate not just the future of our children, but the strength of ambition." He gestured toward Cassandra, her crimson gown shimmering under the lights. "And I am proud to have by my side a woman who inspires me every day." The words struck like knives. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some clapping politely, others glancing at the empty space where his wife should have been. Jonathan didn't care. He had rewritten the story of his life, casting Scarlett out of the spotlight and replacing her with Cassandra. What Jonathan didn't know was that the story was far from his to control. Because even as he soaked in the applause, a luxury car had just pulled up outside the hotel. Inside, Scarlett Hayes placed a trembling hand on her stomach, whispering to her unborn child that tonight they would face the world together. At her side sat Adrian Blackwell, silent, steady, a man whose very presence carried the weight of power. And in just minutes, the ballroom's glittering perfection would shatter. The gala had begun as Jonathan's stage, but it would end as Scarlett's battlefield. Jonathan Colton had built his empire on charm, risk, and ruthless ambition. To the public, he was the self-made millionaire who clawed his way out of obscurity to stand among the elite. But those who truly knew him understood the darker truth. Jonathan was addicted to power, addicted to being admired, and willing to sacrifice anyone to keep that spotlight burning on him. Cassandra Monroe had once been Scarlett's closest confidante, the woman she trusted with secrets, dreams, and fears. They had studied together, laughed over heartbreaks, and promised to always have each other's backs. To Scarlett, Cassandra was family. To Cassandra, Scarlett was a stepping stone. When Jonathan first laid eyes on Cassandra at a business cocktail party, he recognized the same hunger in her eyes that lived in his own. She was beautiful, yes, but beauty alone didn't captivate him. It was her ambition, sharp as glass, cloaked beneath the softness of friendship. She knew how to flatter, how to listen, how to pretend loyalty while plotting her ascent. Jonathan didn't see betrayal. He saw opportunity. Their affair began in whispers. Late-night phone calls, innocent business lunches, weekends disguised as conferences. At first, Jonathan justified it as harmless. Cassandra was just company, someone who understood his drive in ways Scarlett never could. But soon, justification turned to obsession. With Cassandra, he felt admired again, worshipped even. She fed his ego, laughed at his jokes, made him believe he was invincible. Cassandra, on the other hand, calculated every move. She knew Jonathan's wealth could open doors she had only dreamed of. To her, being Scarlett's friend had been useful, but stealing Scarlett's husband? That was a promotion. She relished the danger, the thrill of holding Scarlett's trust in one hand while entwining the other around Jonathan's. Still, cracks already showed. For all their whispered passion, their connection was toxic. Jonathan was controlling, quick to anger, easily jealous. Cassandra, though cunning, never truly respected him. She saw him as a ladder, not a partner. Their romance was built on lies, vanity, and greed, destined to collapse under its own weight. And tonight, at the gala, they flaunted it like a crown jewel. Jonathan introduced Cassandra as if she were the queen of his empire, ignoring the gasps, delighting in the scandal. Cassandra basked in the stolen spotlight, her crimson gown shimmering as she leaned into Jonathan's arm, daring the world to question her place. But beneath her radiant smile, Cassandra's heart raced. She knew Scarlett too well. She knew Scarlett wasn't weak, and a part of her feared that tonight, the woman she had betrayed would not stay silent. Jonathan, blinded by arrogance, noticed nothing. He thought Scarlett was tucked away at home, too fragile, too pregnant, too broken to fight back. He believed the game was his to control, the narrative his to write. He was wrong, because the doors to that ballroom would soon open. And when they did, Jonathan's carefully crafted illusion would burn. The predator and his accomplice thought they had won. But in less than 15 minutes, the prey they mocked would become their greatest threat. The moment was rehearsed in Jonathan's mind. The applause, the admiration, the whispers of envy as he flaunted Cassandra on his arm, and for a while he believed he had succeeded. The ballroom pulsed with attention, cameras snapping, champagne fizzing, all orbiting around his audacity. He looked untouchable. But then, the double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. The music faltered, conversations hushed, and hundreds of eyes turned as if drawn by some invisible force. Scarlett Hayes stood there, 6 months pregnant, radiant in an elegant gown of midnight blue that shimmered softly under the chandeliers. Her hand rested protectively on her stomach, the quiet symbol of the life she carried. And beside her, towering with calm authority, was Adrian Blackwell, the elusive billionaire CEO whose presence alone commanded respect. The air crackled with disbelief. Guests gasped, their whispers rising like a storm. "That's his wife? Isn't she pregnant? And Adrian Blackwell, what is he doing here?" Phones lifted discreetly, flashes capturing the moment that would dominate headlines by morning. Jonathan froze. His smug grin collapsed into a grimace as he locked eyes with Scarlett. For the first time all evening, his confidence wavered. He hadn't expected her. He hadn't prepared for this. And worst of all, she wasn't alone. Scarlett's gaze didn't tremble. Her lips curved into a faint, steady smile. A smile that told Jonathan she knew everything. She knew about Cassandra, about the lies, about the betrayal. And she wasn't there to beg. She was there to stand tall. Cassandra's hand slipped from Jonathan's arm, her crimson nails digging into her clutch as panic flickered in her eyes. She had always considered Scarlett fragile, too gentle to fight. But the woman standing in the doorway was not fragile. She was fire wrapped in grace, and Cassandra felt the heat already rising. Adrian offered Scarlett his arm as if to anchor her. Together, they stepped into the ballroom. Every click of her heels on the marble floor echoed like thunder, each step a declaration that she was not broken, not defeated. Guests parted, murmurs following her path like ripples across water. Jonathan tried to recover, forcing a laugh that rang hollow. "Scarlett, what a surprise," he said, his voice straining under the weight of 100 watching eyes. But his words only deepened the humiliation, because everyone could see the truth. The betrayed wife had just stolen back the stage. Scarlett stopped a few feet from him, her eyes locked on her husband, then flicked briefly toward Cassandra. The silence was suffocating. Even the orchestra had gone still, bows frozen against strings. For the first time all night, Jonathan wasn't in control. Scarlett was. And in that silence, the entire ballroom realized something Jonathan never had. Scarlett Hayes was not a woman to be discarded. She was a storm, and the storm had arrived. The night that began as Jonathan's triumph had just become Scarlett's reckoning. The applause never came. The silence that filled the ballroom when Scarlett walked in was deafening. But the real storm brewed inside her chest. She held her head high until the moment she stepped out of sight, away from the chandeliers, away from the hundreds of eyes devouring her humiliation. In the quiet of a side corridor, the mask broke. Her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps, and tears blurred the glittering world she had just confronted. She leaned against the wall, one hand clutching her stomach, the other trembling as it covered her mouth to stifle a sob. Scarlett had always imagined heartbreak as something private, a wound carried in silence. But this betrayal, was a public execution of her dignity. She could still hear the whispers. Isn't that her best friend? How could he do that to her while she's pregnant? The sting of pity in their voices cut deeper than any blade. Adrian stood beside her, silent but steady. He didn't reach for her, didn't offer hollow words. He simply stayed, his presence a shield against the crushing weight of shame. When she finally looked at him, her tears streaking her cheeks, she whispered, "Why wasn't I enough?" It was the question that had haunted her for months. Why the man she had given everything to, her trust, her youth, her future, could trade her for someone who had once shared her secrets and dreams. The ache of betrayal wasn't just about Jonathan's kiss. It was about Cassandra's smile. The friend who had wiped her tears during breakups, who had sworn to stand by her at the altar, now stealing the life she had built. Scarlett slid down the wall, cradling her stomach, whispering to her unborn child, "I'm so sorry, baby. I wanted you to grow up in love, not this." Her sobs shook her fragile frame, each tear a reminder of promises broken, of illusions shattered. For a fleeting moment she wished she could vanish, run away from the city, from Jonathan, from Cassandra, from every pair of eyes that had watched her humiliation unfold. She imagined herself back in her hometown, barefoot on the sand, no riches, no scandals, just peace. But peace was gone, stolen by the man who vowed to protect her. Adrian finally spoke, his voice calm, steady. "You are not the one who failed. He is." Scarlett looked up, her eyes swollen, her face pale, but his words pierced through the fog of despair. "Jonathan threw away gold for ashes. Don't you dare believe you're the broken one." Still, the weight of shame pressed heavy on her chest. In that corridor, Scarlett felt small, powerless, like a shadow of the woman she once believed herself to be. She wept until her tears ran dry, until exhaustion dulled the ache. And yet, beneath the wreckage of her heart, a spark remained. Faint, fragile, but alive. Jonathan thought he had destroyed her. Cassandra thought she had replaced her. But the scarlet haze sitting on that cold marble floor was not finished. She was grieving, yes. But grief, when burned long enough, turns into fire. And soon, that fire would consume everything Jonathan thought he owned. Scarlett sat in silence, her palms pressed against her swollen belly, her body still trembling from the storm of tears. The Gala's music and chatter continued faintly behind the walls, a cruel reminder that the world outside hadn't stopped even though hers had shattered. Adrian knelt down in front of her, his sharp suit wrinkling against the cold marble floor. His eyes, steady and unflinching, met hers. "Scarlett," he said quietly, "you don't know the whole truth, and it's time you did." She blinked through her swollen lashes, confusion clouding her grief. "What truth? That my husband would rather show off my best friend than stand by me?" Her voice cracked with bitterness, and fresh tears threatened to fall. Adrian shook his head. "Jonathan's betrayal runs deeper than that. He isn't just unfaithful, he's reckless. He's been siphoning company funds, hiding assets, manipulating investors. I have the evidence." Scarlett froze. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard him. Jonathan, the man who prided himself on being a self-made millionaire, stealing, deceiving his own empire? Her stomach twisted. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. Adrian's voice was low, resolute. "Because you're not powerless. You're not just his wife. You're the one person who can destroy the illusion he hides behind. But you need to decide. Will you let him bury you, or will you stand up and take back what he tried to steal?" Scarlett's breath caught. She had walked into the gala trembling, convinced she was only a victim. But now, a different picture began to form in her mind. She wasn't just a betrayed wife. She was a woman standing at the edge of revelation, holding a match in a room full of secrets. Her thoughts raced. For years she had built Jonathan up, sacrificed her dreams, silenced her instincts, and now she learned that while she carried his child, he was carrying lies. Her chest tightened with both fury and clarity. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "I don't know if I have the strength." Adrian's eyes softened. but his tone stayed firm. "You do. I've seen it. You walked into that ballroom tonight when anyone else would have stayed home. You faced him, pregnant, humiliated, and you still stood taller than he ever could. That wasn't weakness, Scarlett. That was power, yours." Her lips trembled, but his words lit a spark inside her chest. She remembered the whispers, the gasps, the silence that fell when she entered. For a fleeting moment, the room had been hers. Not Jonathan's, not Cassandra's, hers. Adrian reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek folder. Inside were documents, photographs, transactions, proof of Jonathan's deceit. He laid it gently in her lap. "This is your weapon," he said. "With this, you don't just walk away. You win." Scarlett stared down at the evidence, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages. The numbers screamed betrayal louder than Jonathan's kiss ever could. She wasn't just humiliated. She had been robbed, lied to, played for a fool in every possible way. And in that moment, grief began to shift into something sharper. Rage. Her tears dried, her spine straightened. Scarlett Hayes was no longer just the woman sobbing in a hallway. She was the woman about to rewrite the ending. For the first time that night, Jonathan wasn't the predator. He was prey. Scarlett stared at the folder in her lap long after Adrian had placed it there. Each page was a dagger of truth, slicing through the last remnants of her illusions. For years, she had believed Jonathan's empire was built on brilliance and hard work. Now she knew it was built on lies. Lies she had helped sustain with her silence, her loyalty, her sacrifice. Her hands no longer trembled. They clenched. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into the gala. That Scarlett had been a dreamer, a believer in fairy tales. The Scarlett sitting now was awake, and she would never close her eyes again. "Stand up," Adrian said softly. His voice was calm, but there was an unshakable authority in it. "Not for me. Not even for him. Stand for yourself." Scarlett rose slowly, smoothing her gown. The tears that had stained her cheeks were gone, replaced by something harder, sharper. She walked toward a nearby mirror, her reflection shimmering beneath the dim corridor lights. For a moment, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. Her hair had fallen loose, her mascara smudged, but beneath the mess was strength. Raw, undeniable strength. She touched her stomach, whispering, "We're not victims, not anymore." The baby inside her kicked gently as if answering, and Scarlett's lips curved into a determined smile. Adrian stepped closer. "Jonathan expects you to crawl. To beg. He's counting on your silence. Prove him wrong." Scarlett nodded, her decision crystallizing. She would not leave that gala broken. She would rise, not in anger alone, but in power. The transformation began with her heart. She shed the guilt, the endless questions of why wasn't I enough. She replaced them with certainty. Jonathan's betrayal was his weakness, not hers. Then came her mind. She studied the documents again, memorizing the evidence. Every number, every transaction was ammunition. With this knowledge, she wasn't defenseless. She had a sword hidden beneath silk. Finally came her appearance. Adrian, almost as if he had anticipated this moment, led her to a private room reserved for VIP guests. There a stylist from the event staff, someone Adrian discreetly trusted, stood ready. Scarlett removed her ruined makeup, washed away the mascara and the humiliation, and let them paint her face anew. Bold eyeliner, a touch of crimson lipstick, her hair swept elegantly back into place. No longer the tear-streaked wife, now a queen preparing for battle. The gown she wore shimmered differently now. Earlier, it had been the dress of a woman hoping to fit in, hoping to be seen. Now it was armor. The midnight blue silk caught the light like steel, wrapping her in dignity and defiance. When Scarlett stepped out of that room, every head would turn again. But this time, they would not see pity. They would see fire. Adrian watched her quietly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He didn't need to tell her she was ready. She already knew. Scarlett Hayes was no longer the woman betrayed. She was the woman reborn, and the next time she faced Jonathan, she wouldn't stand in the shadows. She would stand in the spotlight and burn him with it. The chandeliers still glittered, the orchestra still played, but the atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted since Scarlett's first entrance. Whispers spread like wildfire, speculation buzzing louder than the music. Jonathan tried to mask his unease with champagne and hollow laughter, but his eyes darted nervously toward the doors every few seconds. Cassandra clung to his arm, her smile frozen, her pulse racing beneath the thin fabric of her gown. And then the doors opened again. This time, Scarlett did not tremble. She walked into the ballroom with Adrian by her side, their presence magnetic, their confidence unshakable. Her gown shimmered like midnight armor, her makeup flawless, her posture regal. Gone was the humiliated wife from earlier. This was a woman reborn, a woman who carried the room with nothing more than her stride. The crowd parted instinctively, silence washing over the space. Phones lifted discreetly again, recording the moment history shifted. Scarlett's every step echoed with authority, each click of her heels on the marble floor a drumbeat announcing war. Jonathan's smirk faltered completely. He rose to his feet, attempting to reassert control. "Scarlett," he said loudly, forcing a laugh. "You didn't have to come back. Really, this is—" Scarlett raised a hand, and the room hushed. Her voice was calm, steady, but it carried like thunder. "You're right, Jonathan. I didn't have to come back. But I chose to. Because the truth deserves witnesses." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jonathan stiffened. Cassandra's nails dug into his sleeve. Scarlett turned to the audience, her eyes sweeping across the sea of tuxedos and gowns. "You've all admired Jonathan Colton as a self-made millionaire, a man of honor. But honor doesn't betray his wife with her best friend, and honor doesn't steal from the very investors who trusted him." Rumors exploded like firecrackers. Journalists leaned forward, fingers flying over their phones. Adrian stepped forward, producing the folder he had given Scarlett earlier. He handed it to a well-known financial reporter in the front row. "Proof," Adrian said simply. "Every transaction, every stolen dollar. See for yourselves." The reporter's eyes widened as he scanned the documents. The whispers in the room turned into outrage, fraud, embezzlement. The words hissed through the air like snakes. Jonathan lunged forward, his voice cracking. "This is slander. She's hysterical. She's—" Scarlett cut him off with a cold, unflinching stare. "Hysterical? No, Jonathan. I'm awake, and so is everyone else." Cassandra tried to pull away, but Jonathan clutched her arm too tightly, his mask slipping into desperation. The once dazzling couple now looked like cornered thieves under the unforgiving glow of the chandeliers. Scarlett, however, stood radiant, unbroken. She turned back to the crowd. "For years I stayed silent. I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought loyalty meant looking the other way. But tonight I learned the truth. Love is not humiliation. Loyalty is not slavery. And women are not meant to be disposable." The ballroom erupted in applause, some hesitant at first, then thunderous. Power shifted tangibly in the air, leaving Jonathan exposed, Cassandra disgraced, and Scarlett triumphant. She took Adrian's arm once more, her chin high, her eyes blazing. Jonathan had tried to make her invisible. But now, in front of the entire city, Scarlett Hayes had never shone brighter. And as she walked past her husband, she whispered so only he could hear, "Your empire ends tonight." The ballroom, once Jonathan's stage, now belonged to Scarlett. Applause thundered through the air, echoing against marble columns and crystal chandeliers. For years, she had stood in Jonathan's shadow. Tonight, she had stepped into the light and claimed it as her own. Jonathan tried to speak, his face flushed with desperation, but his words drowned beneath the rising tide of scandal. Reporters swarmed, investors demanded answers, and cameras captured every angle of his collapse. Cassandra, her crimson gown wilting under the weight of shame, slipped away into the crowd, her carefully crafted facade crumbling. Scarlett didn't need to gloat. Her silence was sharper than any insult, her calm composure more powerful than Jonathan's broken protests. She simply stood tall, radiant, dignified, letting the world see that she was not a victim, but a victor. Adrian stepped beside her, his steady presence like stone. But he never overshadowed her. He simply stood back, making space for Scarlett to shine. This was her battle, her triumph, her story, and she carried it with grace. Later that night, as the gala emptied and Jonathan was escorted out by furious investors, Scarlett walked to the balcony overlooking the glittering skyline. The city stretched before her, vast and alive, no longer intimidating, but inviting. She placed her hand on her belly and whispered softly, "We're free now. And we're stronger than ever." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were no longer tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of healing, of victory. Adrian joined her, silent for a long moment before speaking. "You didn't just survive tonight, Scarlett. You transformed it. You reminded everyone in that room, and maybe even yourself, who you really are." She turned to him, a small but fierce smile on her lips. "I thought I had lost everything, but maybe I've just started to find myself." The words rang true. For years, Scarlett had measured her worth through Jonathan's eyes, sacrificing dreams, silencing doubts, enduring betrayal. Tonight, she had reclaimed her name, her dignity, her future. News headlines the next morning confirmed it. Millionaire exposed at Gala. Wife turns tables with proof of fraud. Scarlett Hayes, from betrayed wife to symbol of strength. Messages poured in from women across the city, some strangers, some friends she hadn't spoken to in years. They told her she had given them courage, that her story was theirs too, that her strength had reminded them of their own. Scarlett read each word with a heart full of gratitude. Jonathan's empire crumbled in days. Cassandra faded from the spotlight, remembered only as the mistress who lost everything. But Scarlett rose, not as the woman defined by betrayal, but as the woman who turned betrayal into power. And as she stood weeks later, cradling her newborn child in her arms, Scarlett whispered a promise into the tiny ear pressed against her chest. "You'll grow up knowing that strength isn't about money or power. It's about never letting anyone dim your light." The baby stirred, a soft cry breaking into the quiet room, and Scarlett smiled through tears of joy. She had survived the fire. She had walked through humiliation, heartbreak, and despair. And she had emerged unbroken, unstoppable. Her story was no longer one of betrayal. It was a story of resilience, of justice, of triumph. And as the world watched, Scarlett Hayes became living proof that no woman is too weak to rise again. The morning after the gala, New York woke up buzzing with scandal. Scarlett's name was everywhere. Headlines screamed from newsstands and smartphone screens. Jonathan Colton exposed, betrayal and fraud at Bright Future's Gala. Pregnant wife turns the tables with help from Adrian Blackwell. From socialite to symbol, Scarlett Hayes stuns the city. Scarlett sat at her kitchen table, a steaming mug of tea untouched in front of her. The night before had felt like a storm. This morning felt like its echo, calm, yet charged with the smell of smoke and ruin. She glanced at her phone, the screen lighting up with hundreds of messages. Some were from old friends she hadn't heard from in years. Others were strangers, women across the city thanking her, calling her brave, telling her she had given them hope. Scarlett's hands shook slightly as she read the messages. She never set out to be anyone's hero. She had simply fought to survive, to protect her dignity, to shield her unborn child. Yet somehow her story had become more than hers alone. Meanwhile, Jonathan's world unraveled. Reporters camped outside his penthouse. Investors pulled their money. His board demanded answers, distancing themselves from the scandal that clung to him like smoke. Cassandra was spotted leaving through the back door of the hotel, her once proud smile replaced with a pale mask of fear. She had thought herself untouchable, but her fall was as swift as her rise. Scarlett turned off her phone, pressing her palm against her stomach. The baby kicked, a small reminder of why she had endured, why she had fought. She whispered softly, "We're okay. We're going to be okay." Then came the knock on her door. It was Adrian. He stood there, not in a tailored suit this time, but in a simple shirt, his presence less like a CEO and more like a man quietly offering his strength. He carried a folder tucked under his arm. "You'll need this," he said as she let him in. "Jonathan's lawyers are already preparing for war. He won't surrender easily." Scarlett's heart tightened. "I don't want a war, Adrian. I just want peace." Adrian's gaze was steady. "Sometimes peace is only won when the truth is undeniable, and you have the truth." She sat with him at the table, flipping through more documents. Contracts, financial records, evidence of Jonathan's schemes. The weight of it was heavy, but it was also empowering. For the first time in years, she wasn't trapped in Jonathan's narrative. She held the pen now. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Scarlett admitted. "You're more ready than you think," Adrian replied. "You proved that last night." Scarlett looked at him, at the quiet certainty in his eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt something stir in her chest. Not fear, not pain, but possibility. Outside, cameras still flashed, the city still whispered, Jonathan still scrambled to save his empire. But inside her kitchen, Scarlett Hayes made a decision. She would not just survive this storm, she would own it. And when she walked into the courtroom, the world would see that the reckoning had only just begun. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and nerves. Rows of reporters lined the benches, their pens ready, their cameras poised to capture every flicker of emotion. The scandal had already rocked the city, but today was the first official showdown. Jonathan Colton entered first, flanked by an army of lawyers in tailored suits. His once confident stride now carried a hint of desperation, but he masked it with a smirk. He wore arrogance like a second skin, determined to convince the world that he was still in control. Cassandra trailed behind him, her crimson lips pressed into a thin line, avoiding the judgmental stares that followed her. Then came Scarlett. She walked into the courtroom with quiet grace, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The cameras clicked furiously, but she didn't flinch. She wore a simple navy dress, not flashy, not submissive, just strong. And beside her, Adrian Blackwell's steady presence reminded everyone in the room that Scarlett was no longer alone. The judge, a stern woman with years of experience, called the court to order. Jonathan's lead attorney stood, voice dripping with false concern. "Your Honor, my client has been the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by his estranged wife and her new companion. These allegations of fraud are baseless, fueled by jealousy and malice. Mr. Colton is a respected businessman, a philanthropist. He deserves protection from these wild accusations." Scarlett's stomach tightened, but she held her chin high. She had expected this. Jonathan always twisted the truth, always painted himself as the victim. Her attorney, a sharp woman named Claire Benton, rose calmly. "Your Honor, we anticipated this defense, which is why we come prepared. The evidence against Mr. Colton is not speculation, it is fact." She gestured, and Adrian stepped forward, placing a thick binder of documents on the table. "Every transaction, every falsified record, every stolen dollar is here, verified and indisputable." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jonathan's smirk faltered for a split second before he leaned toward his attorney, whispering urgently. Scarlett's heart pounded as Claire continued. "This is not the story of a jealous wife. This is the story of a man who thought his lies would never see daylight. A man who betrayed his investors, his company, and his family." Jonathan shot Scarlett a glare, his eyes burning with venom. He leaned forward, his voice rising. "She's nothing without me. She wouldn't even be in this courtroom if it weren't for my name, my money, my success." The judge's gavel struck. "Mr. Colton, control yourself." But Scarlett didn't need the judge's intervention. She stood, her voice calm yet piercing. "You're wrong, Jonathan. I am not nothing without you. I was something before you, and I will be something after you. The only thing I lost was the illusion of who you pretended to be." The room fell silent. Even Jonathan's lawyers shifted uncomfortably. The judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "The court will review the evidence in full. But one thing is clear already. This is not the case of a jealous wife. This is the case of a man who may very well have built his empire on lies." Scarlett sat down slowly, her pulse steady, her spirit unshaken. Jonathan had walked into court believing he could twist the story. Instead, the world had witnessed his mask begin to crack. And Scarlett knew this was only the beginning of his downfall. Jonathan Colton had once believed he was untouchable. Money, charm, and connections had always shielded him. But after the courtroom clash, cracks spread across the foundation of his empire. Investors pulled out, journalists dug deeper, and whispers turned into headlines. His name was no longer synonymous with success. It was synonymous with scandal. And Jonathan could not accept that. Behind the glossy doors of his penthouse, he paced like a caged animal, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. Cassandra sat on the velvet couch, scrolling anxiously through social media posts. Each headline felt like a dagger. Scarlett Hayes, the woman who stood tall. Jonathan Colton, the fall of a millionaire. "Turn that off," Jonathan snapped, his voice sharp with rage. Cassandra flinched, setting the phone down. "She's winning, Jonathan," Cassandra whispered. "People love her. They see her as some kind of hero." Jonathan cut her off, slamming his fist against the glass table. "She's not a hero. She's nothing without me, and I'll prove it." Desperation had twisted his once polished demeanor into something darker, something crueler. He called his lawyers, demanding delays, counter-lawsuits, smokescreens. He ordered investigators to dig into Scarlett's past, to find any shred of dirt he could weaponize. He spread rumors through tabloids, claiming Adrian was manipulating her, that Scarlett was unstable, that her pregnancy made her unfit to handle stress. But the smear campaign backfired. Each attempt only fueled sympathy for Scarlett, strengthening her image as the wronged yet resilient wife. Women who had suffered similar betrayals rallied around her, and journalists tore apart Jonathan's weak accusations. Still, Jonathan refused to surrender. Late at night, he plotted new schemes. He threatened Cassandra when she wavered, reminding her she had just as much to lose if the truth buried them both. "You're in this with me," he hissed, his grip on her wrist leaving bruises. Cassandra nodded through tears, realizing she was no longer his lover. She was his hostage. Meanwhile, Scarlett rebuilt quietly. She attended her doctor appointments, designed a nursery with gentle colors, surrounded herself with the warmth of friends who had returned after years of Jonathan's isolation. And through it all, Adrian remained close, not as a savior, but as a steady presence. He helped her strategize, reviewed documents with her, and most importantly, reminded her that she was never alone again. Jonathan saw this and seethed. Each photograph of Scarlett smiling, each article praising her courage, each whisper of her strength felt like an insult carved into his pride. He couldn't bear it. He couldn't stand being forgotten while she rose. So he grew reckless. He made phone calls to old contacts, men who owed him favors, asking for ways to silence her. He thought of buying off witnesses, burying evidence, even intimidating Scarlett directly. But every attempt crumbled under the weight of Adrian's influence and Scarlett's unyielding resolve. One night, Jonathan stood at his penthouse window, the city lights stretching below him. His reflection stared back, hollow eyes, clenched jaw, a man drowning in his own fury. "If she wants war," he muttered, "then I'll give her war." But deep down, beneath the arrogance and threats, fear coiled like a snake in his chest. For the first time in his life, Jonathan Colton realized he was no longer the hunter. He was the hunted. And Scarlett, the woman he once thought too weak to fight, was closing in. Cassandra Monroe had always believed she could play the game. When she first slipped into Jonathan's world, she thought she was trading up. Power, wealth, the intoxicating glow of luxury. For a while, she convinced herself she was winning. Scarlett was out, she was in, and Jonathan's empire seemed unshakable. But now the empire was crumbling, and Cassandra was trapped inside its ruins. Every day, new headlines shredded Jonathan's reputation. Paparazzi hounded her on the street. Former friends stopped answering her calls. The glamorous life she thought she had secured was unraveling, and all she had left was Jonathan. And Jonathan was no longer charming. He was frightening. At first, his anger exploded in shouts and slammed doors. Then it turned physical. Bruises bloomed on Cassandra's arms, hidden beneath long sleeves. He gripped her harder each time she questioned him, his voice sharp with venom. "You're nothing without me. Don't forget who pulled you out of obscurity." But Cassandra was not as weak as he believed. She had played the role of the adoring mistress, the loyal confidant, but beneath it she had always been calculating. And now, survival meant shifting sides. One night, after Jonathan stormed out to meet with his lawyers, Cassandra sat alone in his study. She stared at the safe hidden behind a painting on the wall, her heart pounding. She had seen him open it countless times, punching in the same careless code. With trembling fingers she entered the numbers. The lock clicked. Inside lay documents, flash drives, and stacks of cash. Cassandra rifled through the files, her breath catching when she found them. Contracts forged, accounts hidden, bribes detailed in black and white. Proof, enough to destroy him completely. For the first time in weeks, Cassandra smiled. Jonathan had underestimated her. He had used her, hurt her, discarded her humanity. Now she would use him. The next morning, Cassandra made a phone call, not to Jonathan's lawyers, but to Scarlett's. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "I have evidence against Jonathan Colton, and I'm ready to talk." Scarlett's attorney, Claire Benton, was cautious at first, but when Cassandra delivered copies of the documents, her credibility was undeniable. Jonathan hadn't just been careless, he had been criminal. And now, the very woman he thought was his greatest ally had become his deadliest enemy. When Jonathan found out, his rage was volcanic. He confronted Cassandra, his voice trembling with fury. "You think they'll protect you? You think Scarlett will forgive you? You're finished, Cassandra. Without me, you're nothing." But Cassandra no longer cowered. She stood her ground, her eyes blazing. "No, Jonathan, without me, you're nothing. You built your empire on lies, and I just handed the world the matches to burn it down." Jonathan lunged at her, but security intervened. Investors had already pulled strings to protect their own interests. Cassandra walked away that night with her head high. The weight of his control finally lifted from her shoulders. For Scarlett, the betrayal was bittersweet. Cassandra had been her closest friend, the woman she once trusted most. Forgiveness was impossible, but Cassandra's choice to turn against Jonathan gave Scarlett the final weapon she needed. The boardrooms buzzed, the press salivated, and Jonathan's empire trembled on the brink of collapse. And Scarlett knew the mistress who stole her husband had just handed her the key to his destruction. Scarlett never imagined her private pain would become public history. Yet, within days of Cassandra's betrayal, her story spread far beyond New York's borders. What had begun as whispers in a ballroom exploded into a media firestorm that engulfed the nation, and then the world. Morning talk shows dissected every detail. Headlines flashed across screens. From betrayal to bravery, Scarlett Hayes speaks out. Magazines splashed her photo on their covers, calling her the face of resilience. Even late-night hosts, usually merciless, spoke her name with respect. Scarlett sat in her living room one morning, her tea cooling on the table as she watched a news anchor summarize her life in 3 minutes. Pregnant wife exposes millionaire husband at charity gala. Betrayal by her best friend, evidence of fraud revealed, public support grows. It was surreal. For years she had been invisible, just Jonathan's wife, the silent figure at his side. Now she was everywhere. But fame was a double-edged sword. Paparazzi crowded outside her townhouse. Reporters shouted questions across the street. Supporters mailed letters, flowers, gifts for her unborn child. At the same time, Jonathan's defenders spread venom online, calling her a liar, accusing her of orchestrating the downfall for money. Adrian warned her gently, "The spotlight can heal, but it can also burn. You must decide how to use it." Scarlett nodded. She didn't want to be a celebrity. But she realized she had been handed a platform, and she had a choice, to shrink from it or to rise. When a prominent journalist requested a live interview, Scarlett hesitated. The idea of sitting under bright lights, answering questions about wounds still fresh, terrified her. But then she thought of all the women who had written to her, sharing their own stories of betrayal, manipulation, and survival. If she stayed silent, she would betray them too. So Scarlett agreed. The night of the broadcast, millions tuned in. She appeared calm, poised, her gown simple, her hands folded gently over her stomach. The interviewer asked the inevitable question, "Scarlett, how did you find the strength to walk into that ballroom after what Jonathan and Cassandra did to you?" Scarlett took a breath, her voice steady. "I thought I had lost everything, but then I looked at myself, and I realized I still had my dignity. I still had my child. I still had my truth. That was enough." The audience applauded. Online, the clip went viral. Hashtags trended worldwide. Stand like Scarlett, strengthen Scarlett. Jonathan, meanwhile, spiraled further. The media he once controlled turned against him. Investigative pieces uncovered years of questionable deals. Former associates abandoned him, claiming ignorance. His empire, once built on perception, now crumbled under scrutiny. Scarlett didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her power wasn't in Jonathan's fall, it was in her own rise. She had gone from whispered humiliation to a symbol of resilience. But even as the world celebrated her, Scarlett remained grounded. She reminded herself every morning that she wasn't fighting for fame. She was fighting for justice, for her child, for the countless women who saw themselves in her story. And with every headline, every cheer, every voice raised in her name, Scarlett knew one thing with certainty. Her story was no longer just about survival. It had become a revolution. Jonathan Colton had lost the crowd, the courtroom, and the press. But in his mind, defeat was unthinkable. He had spent his life bending the rules, twisting the truth, and always landing on his feet. Why should this time be any different? From his penthouse, now half empty as staff abandoned him, Jonathan paced with manic energy. Cassandra was gone, Scarlett had the world on her side, and investors had frozen his accounts. Yet still, he refused to surrender. He summoned his remaining allies, 2 lawyers still desperate for his money, and a PR consultant willing to gamble her career. "We can flip this," Jonathan growled, slamming his fist on the table. "Scarlett wants to play saint? Fine. We paint her as the sinner." His plan was ruthless. He would dig into Scarlett's past, twist every detail, and flood the media with lies. He wanted people to question her integrity, her mental stability, even her pregnancy. "If she looks unstable," he said with a sneer, "the sympathy disappears." The consultant hesitated. "But sir, the public adores her. She's untouchable right now." Jonathan leaned in, his eyes cold. "No one is untouchable." So the smear campaign began. Anonymous articles appeared online, hinting Scarlett was manipulating Adrian, that she was after his fortune. Old photos were taken out of context, painted as signs of a reckless past. A forged medical report suggested complications with her pregnancy, questioning her fitness as a mother. For a moment, Jonathan thought he was winning again. Blogs picked up the rumors, tabloids splashed scandalous headlines. He smirked at his reflection, convinced the tide was turning. But Scarlett was no longer the woman who hid in silence. With Adrian and Claire, her attorney, she fought back strategically. They released receipts proving the smear stories were fabricated. Doctors vouched for her health. Friends and colleagues publicly defended her character. And most importantly, Scarlett never wavered. When reporters asked her about the lies, she looked directly into the camera and said, "I have nothing to hide, but Jonathan does." The public saw through Jonathan's desperation. Each attack only made him look smaller, weaker, more pathetic. Instead of destroying Scarlett's credibility, he destroyed his own. As the lies collapsed, Jonathan grew reckless. He stormed into board meetings uninvited, shouting at former allies who now turned their backs. He called Cassandra late at night, begging her to retract her statements, only to be met with silence. He even showed up outside Scarlett's townhouse once, pounding on the door until security dragged him away. The man who once walked red carpets with pride now looked like a ghost of himself, wild-eyed, unshaven, unraveling. In his final act of desperation, Jonathan attempted to flee. He arranged a private jet, stuffed with whatever cash he could salvage, planning to vanish before the law closed in. But his arrogance betrayed him. Federal investigators, tipped off by Scarlett's legal team, intercepted him at the airport. Cameras captured the moment. Jonathan Colton, once the untouchable millionaire, handcuffed and led away under flashing lights. The world didn't see a powerful man that night. They saw a coward caught in his last gambit, undone by his own lies. And as the image spread across every screen, Scarlett Hayes sat quietly at home, her hand on her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "Justice has begun." The courthouse buzzed like a hive on the morning of Jonathan Colton's trial. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashing, as spectators whispered about the scandal that had gripped the nation. For weeks, the world had waited to see whether the man once celebrated as a self-made millionaire would finally face the full weight of justice. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Jonathan sat at the defense table, his once polished appearance unraveling. His suit hung loose on his frame, his eyes sunken, his arrogance replaced by barely contained rage. He whispered furiously to his lawyers, but the room could feel it. He was a man cornered. Cassandra appeared on the witness list, now under federal protection. She avoided Jonathan's glare as she entered, carrying the documents she had taken from his safe. Her testimony painted a damning picture of his lies, hidden accounts, forged contracts, embezzled funds. Every word tightened the noose around him. But the most anticipated moment of the trial was Scarlett's testimony. When her name was called, Scarlett rose slowly, her hand brushing over the gentle swell of her stomach. She walked to the stand with quiet grace, the room holding its breath. Even Jonathan's fury stilled as she raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. Scarlett's attorney, Claire Benton, began gently. "Mrs. Hayes, can you tell the court what brought you here today?" Scarlett's voice was steady, clear. "I'm here because my husband not only betrayed me as a wife, but deceived countless investors and the public. For years I believed in him. I supported him. I sacrificed everything for him. And while I was carrying his child, he was carrying lies." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Scarlett's words weren't just testimony. They were a mirror held up to Jonathan's downfall. Jonathan's lawyer rose for cross-examination, attempting to rattle her. "Mrs. Hayes, isn't it true that you only came forward after your marriage failed? Isn't this about revenge?" Scarlett didn't flinch. She met his gaze firmly. If this were about revenge, I would have stayed silent and let Jonathan destroy himself. This is about truth. This is about ensuring he can't hurt anyone else the way he hurt me and the way he hurt this city. The courtroom erupted in applause before the judge called for order. Even the jury leaned forward, captivated by her calm strength. Jonathan couldn't contain himself any longer. He slammed his hands on the table, his voice rising. She's lying. She's nothing without me. Everything she has, everything she is because of me. Scarlett turned toward him, her eyes unwavering. No, Jonathan, everything I am is in spite of you. The silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan sank back into his chair, his face twisted with fury, but the damage was done. His outburst had revealed the truth more clearly than any evidence could. Jonathan Colton was not a victim. He was a man exposed. By the end of the day, prosecutors had presented overwhelming proof. Cassandra's documents, financial records, testimonies from investors, even recordings of Jonathan's threats. His defense crumbled under the weight of evidence. The judge adjourned for the day, but the outcome was already clear. Jonathan's empire was gone, his reputation in ashes, his future defined not by power but by prison walls. And Scarlett Hayes, once the silent wife in the shadows, had become the voice of justice. The trial was not just Jonathan's reckoning, it was Scarlett's vindication. The final day of Jonathan Colton's trial drew a crowd so large that people spilled onto the courthouse steps, straining for any glimpse of the man who had once been untouchable. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Jurors filed in, their expressions grave. Scarlett sat quietly near the front, her hands folded over her stomach, her attorney and Adrian by her side. The judge entered, her gavel striking once. This court is now in session. We are here to deliver the verdict in the matter of Jonathan Colton. Jonathan shifted uneasily, his eyes darting toward the jury box. His lawyer sat stiffly, defeated. Cassandra avoided his gaze from the gallery, her face pale. The foreman stood, unfolding a piece of paper with trembling hands. On the charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts. Gasps erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jonathan's face went white, his jaw clenching as if he could crush the words by sheer will. But the gavel struck again, silencing the room. The judge's voice was steady, authoritative. Jonathan Colton, your crimes have not only violated the trust of your investors, but also exploited your family and the community. You manipulated, you lied, and you destroyed lives for your own gain. The sentence of this court is 20 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 15. The room broke into a storm of reaction. Some gasped, others clapped quietly, while cameras clicked like rapid-fire applause. Jonathan leapt to his feet, shouting, "This isn't over. I'll appeal. I'll—" His words were cut off as officers moved in, locking handcuffs around his wrists. The image of him being led away, once so powerful, now reduced to a disgraced criminal, burned itself into every headline and every memory. Scarlett sat frozen, her eyes wide. For months, she had dreamed of this moment, but now that it had come, the weight of it crashed over her. Her chest tightened, tears spilling down her cheeks. Not tears of sorrow this time, but of release. She exhaled shakily, clutching her stomach. "It's over," she whispered to her child. "It's finally over." Adrian placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, grounding her. She turned to him, her tears glistening, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the relief fully. The chains of humiliation, fear, and betrayal had broken. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones reaching like claws. Scarlett stopped on the steps, her attorney beside her, Adrian steady at her other side. Cameras flashed, voices shouted, but Scarlett lifted her head, her voice carrying clearly. "This verdict is not just for me," she said. "It's for every person who has ever been silenced, betrayed, or made to feel powerless. Justice is possible. And no matter how dark it gets, the truth will always come to light." The crowd erupted in applause. Hashtags began trending within minutes. Justice for Scarlett, truth prevails. Across the world, her words echoed as a beacon for those who had been wronged. Jonathan's empire ended with a gavel. Scarlett's new life began with her voice. That night, as she returned home, she sat in the nursery she had lovingly prepared. She placed her hand on her belly and whispered through tears of joy, "We're safe now. And we will never live in anyone's shadow again." The verdict had ended Jonathan's reign, but more importantly, it had set Scarlett free. The weeks following Jonathan's sentencing felt surreal to Scarlett. For months, her life had been consumed by courtroom battles, scandal, and the heavy weight of betrayal. But now, with Jonathan locked away and his empire dismantled, the silence in her home felt different, not empty, free. Scarlett began to rebuild piece by piece. She sold the townhouse she once shared with Jonathan, a place that carried too many ghosts. With Adrian's guidance, she purchased a smaller but sunlit apartment overlooking the park. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. Every corner reflected her taste, her choices, her independence. She returned to her first love, design. Friends who had watched her transformation introduced her to clients eager to work with her. Soon, Scarlett was sketching interiors again, her creativity flowing, her confidence restored. What had once been Jonathan's world of power now felt irrelevant. She was building her own. Motherhood drew closer with each passing day. Scarlett poured her heart into the nursery, painting the walls a soft shade of lavender, placing a rocking chair by the window, and filling the shelves with books she hoped to one day read aloud. Each stroke of paint, each folded blanket felt like a promise. Her child's life would be built on love, not lies. Adrian remained nearby, never imposing, always steady. He walked with her in the park when the paparazzi grew too invasive, attended doctor appointments when she felt nervous, and encouraged her every step of the way. Their bond deepened, not from whirlwind romance, but from trust, respect, and shared battles. For Scarlett, it was a reminder that love didn't have to be loud to be strong, but the greatest change came from within. Scarlett no longer saw herself as the betrayed wife. She saw herself as a survivor, a mother, a woman who had faced the fire and emerged stronger. The pain hadn't vanished, it never would, but it no longer defined her. Letters continued to arrive from strangers across the world. Women shared their own stories of betrayal, abuse, and renewal. Scarlett read every one, her heart swelling with both sorrow and pride. She decided to use her newfound platform for good. Partnering with advocacy groups, she launched an initiative to support women navigating divorce and betrayal, offering resources, counseling, and a community of strength. Her name was no longer tied to Jonathan's scandal. It was tied to hope. One evening, as she stood on her balcony watching the city lights, Adrian joined her with 2 cups of tea. "You've changed the story," he said softly. Scarlett smiled, her hand resting on her belly. "No, we've changed it. Every woman who refused to be broken, every person who chose truth over lies, they've changed it with me." Adrian studied her for a moment, admiration in his eyes. "Jonathan thought he destroyed you, but he only revealed who you really are." Scarlett's eyes filled with tears, but they were warm this time, not bitter. She looked out at the skyline, her voice steady. "This isn't the end of my story, it's the beginning." And for the first time in years, Scarlett didn't just believe the words. She felt them deep in her soul. The ashes of betrayal had given birth to a brighter fire, the fire of new beginnings. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of machines and the soft hum of the city beyond the windows. Scarlett Hayes lay in bed, her body exhausted, her spirit soaring. In her arms rested the tiny bundle she had waited for through months of heartbreak, fear, and hope. Her baby, her miracle. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she traced the curve of her newborn's face. The baby's eyes fluttered open, gazing up at her with a fragile innocence untouched by betrayal or scandal. In that instant, every wound in Scarlett's heart seemed to soften. The years of sacrifice, the sting of humiliation, the storm of Jonathan's cruelty, all of it felt distant, like a shadow fading in the morning sun. Adrian stood nearby, silent but steady, his presence a quiet anchor. He had been there through the labor, holding her hand when the pain grew unbearable, whispering words of strength when she faltered. Now he watched with awe as Scarlett cradled new life, his eyes reflecting the depth of respect he carried for her. Scarlett whispered softly to her child, "You will never know lies. You will never know betrayal. You will only know love, truth, and the strength that lives in you." She kissed the baby's forehead, her tears falling like blessings. In the days that followed, the world clamored for a glimpse of the child who had been born in the center of such a public storm. Paparazzi lingered outside the hospital, tabloids speculated on names, and fans flooded social media with messages of love. But Scarlet shielded her baby fiercely. For once, this part of her story belonged to her alone. When she finally returned home, the nursery glowed with soft light. She settled into the rocking chair, the baby resting peacefully against her chest. The gentle creak of the chair, the warmth of her child's breath, it was everything she had dreamed of. And yet it was more. This wasn't just the end of Jonathan's chapter. It was the beginning of Scarlet's legacy. She had endured betrayal, humiliation, and despair, but she had emerged not broken, but whole. Stronger than ever. Adrian entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He paused at the doorway, watching Scarlet in the rocking chair, the baby nestled against her heart. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "You look unstoppable," he said softly. Scarlet laughed gently, the sound light, unburdened. "For the first time in my life, I feel it." She looked down at her baby again, her voice trembling with emotion. "Everything I went through led me here. Every tear, every scar, it was worth it. Because it gave me you." The baby stirred, letting out a tiny cry, and Scarlet soothed them with a soft hum, a lullaby she remembered from her childhood. Adrian stepped closer, his eyes filled with admiration. "Scarlet, you've changed more than your life. You've changed others. You've shown the world that women don't have to stay broken, that they can rise, even from the worst betrayals." Scarlet's heart swelled. She knew her story had become bigger than herself. But in this moment, as she held her child, she realized the greatest victory wasn't the headlines, the courtroom, or the applause. It was the quiet peace of knowing she had protected her dignity, her future, and her child's tomorrow. Outside, the city pulsed with noise, but inside the nursery, there was only love. And as Scarlet rocked her baby to sleep, she whispered the final truth of her journey. "We are free. We are strong. And this is only the beginning." So that's how our story closes, my wonderful friends. You're still here with me, aren't you? If you've stayed until this moment, it means something inside this journey touched your heart in its own quiet way. And maybe like Scarlet, you've known betrayal, humiliation, or the weight of being underestimated. The truth is, pain is part of every life. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Scarlet couldn't control Jonathan's lies or Cassandra's betrayal, but she chose her response. She chose dignity, truth, and the strength to rise. That's the lesson for all of us. We cannot always stop storms, but we can decide how to walk through them. Healing begins the moment we stop asking, "Why me?" and start saying, "What now?" So if this story gave you even a spark of courage, hold it close, carry it into your own battles, and remember, you are never as powerless as you feel. Now, if you felt something here, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe so we can keep walking through these stories together.